last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the Silverback of Ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Dark Matters Radio. Now, normally on Saturday is our Open Lines show, where Rich Saraday and Mark Center join me to entertain your calls, just chit-chat, what have you. But not this week. This week we actually have, or I have, a very special guest. I have a man that I have known for over 32 years joining us tonight. I've interviewed this guest a number of times before, going all the way back to 1987 when, in fact, I was first introduced to my guest tonight, Mr. John Lear. Now, John has one heck of a biography. He is one of the most highly recognized pilots, commercial pilot, instructor pilot. He holds the most FAA certificates ever issued to a single pilot. He retired from flying in 2001. He's got over 19,600 hours, having flown just about everywhere with the possible exception of China, Russia, and Antarctica. His father was William Lear of Lear Sigler Corporation. John was schooled in aircraft design, construction, accident investigation, although he himself had been in a couple of airplane crashes where he really got banged up and about. He is also one of the people that brought one of the most controversial people in the entire UFO field to the public forefront, a guy by the name of Robert Lazar. During all that period of time is basically when I first got to know John and all the other usual suspects, George Knapp, Bob Lazar, of course, Gene Huff, and quite a few others. Actually, was in 1987 when I first came across John. As a matter of fact, it goes all the way back into my initial foray into computers. I was medically retired from the police department in 1986. I was going through physical rehabilitation. I guess it was somewhere along October of 1987, October, November, where I bought my very first computer. It was a Tandy computer, a 1000EX, and I compounded that egregious error by adding a telephone modem to that computer. Now, having a telephone modem back in those days meant that you could take your computer basically online on telephone lines you could sign into BBSs, and there were the first of several pay services that you could join. I did. It was called CompuServe. And with CompuServe back in those days, you could go online if you had a 300 baud modem, which meant you could actually watch your computer monitor form letters pixel by pixel. Cost $6.40 an hour. And if you upped your game to a, what the hell was it, a 12 or 1400 baud modem, you basically doubled your price to $12 an hour. Now, I was on CompuServe when I came across something called the Issues Forum. Now, this was the very forum where I came across several cattle mutilation reports that clicked in my head from back in 1981, 82, when I was a lead investigator investigating 2 cattle mutilations. And I told that story before, but something else I came across, which was a report uploaded by one of the system moderators, a guy by the name of Jim Speiser. Jim was the guy that put basically UFOs initially on the network because he had a BBS he began, which exploded literally around the world, called the Paranet. And one of the people that Speiser knew from having met tonight's guest, Mr. John Lear, was at a Mufon conference, I believe at the time back in Washington. And John told Jim Speiser, I'm going to give you a file, and if you basically have the nerve to put it on your Paranet BBS, I'm going to be shocked, and I'll buy you dinner if the Air Force doesn't shut you down. Well, John sent Jim Speiser that. Basically, it's known today as the John Lear document. And, well, let's just say things took off from there. I read that report, and I got to say there were a number of things in that report that literally shocked me. Now, remember, this was 1987, 1988. And in those days, there was no internet as we know it. And this was basically one of the first papers to hit worldwide, which really presented what later became known as the dark side of ufology. Now, there's a hell of a lot more. But let me go to my guest, John Lear, Mr. John Lear. John, it's a pleasure to have you back. How in the heck are you doing?
Oh, we're doing pretty good, thanks.
Did I ring any bells there, buddy, by that small rendition I just did?
You got it exactly right.
Yeah, you ended up
Everything
buying
you said was
Speiser
correct.
dinner, didn't you?
Yeah, I bought him dinner at Caesar's Palace.
Oh, God. Well, now, when I read that document, I started doing a little digging around and was able to get John's telephone number. I gave John a call. We ended up speaking for a number of hours, several hours, and this was long distance, all right? This was not like today where you can basically, with your cell phone, you can call practically anywhere in the damn world for a flat fee. I called John up and we talked, and the following week, I don't remember if it was FedEx or UPS or something, but I had one of those delivery guys show up at my door at my townhouse, and he had a package, a huge package, and he handed it to me. And basically, John had basically, he had copied a huge sheaf of documents of basically papers that supported his theory, including and I'll never forget this, a videotape, a VHS videotape with a number of specials on it, including from a Japanese astronomer filming a disc-shaped object flying across the surface of the moon, which basically was one of the things that put me on over 25 years of lunar research. Do you recall that, John?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Now, I guess basically because, well, you and I have been down this road before, but hell, there are a lot of new people tuning in tonight. Let me ask you what it was initially, John, that put you onto this crazy path that we've all taken.
In 1985, I had been host for 3 years to a reunion of those pilots that flew in Southeast Asia, not necessarily for the military, but for the CIA and other organizations. And we met in Las Vegas to exchange pleasantries, and this was the third one. And in 1985, I ran into a friend of mine, Greg, I'm trying to think his name, Greg Wilson, I think. He was an A-10 pilot. And I asked where all he had been, and since Southeast Asia. He said, well, he's flying in A-10s. He was based at Bentwaters. And I said, oh, Bentwaters? That's where the flying saucer supposedly landed in Christmas of 1980. He said, no, John, not supposedly. It did. It was there. Many people saw it. It was filmed by the Air Force. And I said, this is true? I mean, flying saucers exist? And up to that point, I hadn't given it much credibility. As a matter of fact, there's a letter floating around I wrote to John Andrews, who was Senior Vice President for Testers. And we were interested mostly in SR-71 Blackbird and other aircraft like that. And he mentioned UFOs, and I said, forget it. There's nothing there. Anyway, Greg said, it was there. And I said, this is true? You mean there are flying saucers? He says, oh, yeah. He says, I didn't get to see it because I was confined to quarters, but I know the guys who did. And that was what started it all.
It's funny because not very long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, I was going through some documents in my office here. Hello? You there, John?
Yep.
Okay. I heard somebody talking in the background.
I thought that was on your end.
No,
Yes.
not on my end.
It was on my end. Sorry.
Okay. I came across a business
Your
card
radio?
from John
radio?
Andrews. And he's been gone now for quite a while, but he had a rather storied career in himself. He was the guy that literally brought us the S4 saucer from Testers based on Bob Lazar's testimony, didn't he?
Yeah. And when he passed away, he was cremated. And me and Jim Goodall, I rented a helicopter, and we flew up just on the northern border of Groom Lake. And I got on Groom Lake's tower frequency, and I said, Dreamland, Dreamland, this is John Lear and Jim Goodall. We're dropping the ashes of our good friend John Andrews, and his ashes should be on the runway in about 3 minutes. And, of course, there was security airplanes flying around. There was a Beechcraft and several others, just to be sure that we didn't go over the border. But anyway, we dropped his ashes there and then flew back to Las Vegas. And the only other incident I had similar to talking to Dreamland was in 1993. I was flying a DC-8. I think it was either for Coletta or Rosenbaum, and we were flying the mail contract from, I believe, Arkansas to Oakland, and we ended up north of Groom Lake on the route to Oakland, and just as we're about 25 miles north of Groom Lake, and I got onto their frequency, and this is maybe about 8 o'clock at night. And I said, Dreamland, Dreamland, this is John Lear and Bob Lazar wishing you a Merry Christmas.
Did they answer?
No, they didn't answer, but shortly after that, they got rid of the name Dreamland and changed it to Control. So now whenever you talk to the tower there, you say Control, Control. This is give your aircraft identification.
Well, 1987, 1988, John Lear became the state director for the Mutual UFO Network, Mufon, and he ended up hosting, well, I guess you could say, one of the most controversial MUFON symposiums in practically their entire history. Now, this is after I got to know John. John was aware of some research I was ears deep in at that time. Mutilations, specifically, I was working on mutilation involving human beings. And I received a call one afternoon from John, and he said, Don, he said, I'm hosting the MUFON symposium down here in Las Vegas, and I'd like to invite you to basically come down and speak on Sunday. Now, this was the very same MUFON symposium where Bill Moore, came down on, I forget, John, if it was the Friday night or the Saturday night, where he made his admission of having worked hand in glove with military intelligence, and it included disinforming Paul Benowitz. Now, from your standpoint, and I remember that time vividly, you were under tremendous stress at the time. You want to talk a little bit about that incident?
Yeah, as state director, I got to pick the people who would be lecturing, and it was you, I think Bill Cooper, Bill English, and Clifford Stone. I think I might be wrong. There's 4 of us. And MUFON came unglued. They said, no, absolutely not. We cannot have speakers like that. We'll pick our own. And that's when they picked Bill Moore. And I think Bill Moore was speaking at about the same time that all the rest of you guys were speaking. I don't remember exactly, but I know that I had rented the stage or auditorium right next to where MUFON was going to have Bill Moore speak, and we had, capacity audience there, and there was not all that much over it listening to Bill Moore.
Well, that was a heck of a thing. But Walt Andrus, who then was the international director, when I flew in to Las Vegas and was checking into the hotel, I walked up to the hotel desk, And I had my luggage with me, plus a laptop computer. And as I'm standing there checking in, this guy walked up to me. He had been standing off to the side with a couple of other people, little short man. He was probably, his head, top of his head came up to my chin. And he walked up to me and he said, "Are you Don Ecker?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, I am. Hi, what can I do for you?" "Well, I'm Walt Andrus. I'm the international director of Mufon. And I just want to tell you, if you speak at this conference, I'll make sure you never speak at another Mufon venue." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, okay, thanks." That was the end of the conversation. I, of course, spoke, and I was never invited to another one from that time forward, John. Did he pull that type of thing with you?
No, he didn't say anything. I held the conference. The people that I selected spoke. It was all nice, but I was no longer MUFON state director, Nevada state director.
They removed you, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. They were not happy.
There were a lot of things happening then, and of course, one of the biggest stories was the Lazar story. How did that develop with you? You actually knew Lazar prior to the whole Area 51 S4 thing, didn't you?
Right. I had given a lecture about UFOs at the Spring Valley Library a couple months prior, and there was just so much interest. Actually, when I got in to speak, it was supposed to be at 6:00, and I had all my papers and stuff that I was going to show, and I got to the door, and the guy opened it, and I mean, it was about a half an hour before, and this place was jam-packed to the ceiling with people, and I closed the door. I said, "Hey, what's going on? Who are those guys?" And they said, "They're waiting for you, John." And so I recovered, went in, gave the lecture. A few months later, I got a call from a friend named Gene Huff, and he said, "John, you don't know me, but I'm an appraiser in town, and I'd like to get a copy of all the stuff that you had in your lecture." And I said, "Well, I'd like to give it to you, but my wife has been so unhappy with all this, so many phone calls and people knocking on the door, that she took all my files, hid them, and changed my telephone number." And he said, "Well, if you ever get a chance," he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll trade you an appraisal of your house for all the stuff you got." And I said, "Okay." Well, I was looking for a second mortgage on my house, and I needed an appraisal, so I told my wife about it, and I got all my files back, made the copy, sent it to Gene, and he called me up and said, "Okay, I agreed to appraise your house. I'm going to come over and take some measurements." And of course, those days everything was done by hand. And he came over, and he brought with him a guy named Bob Lazar, and he introduced him as a former scientist with Los Alamos National Laboratories. And Bob handed me a folder that had copies of his degrees from both MIT and California Institute of Technology. And I looked at them and put them in a file at my desk. And then we started talking. And Gene and I were talking about UFOs and Billy Myers and this and that and so on and so on. And Bob was just sitting there rolling his eyes. He just couldn't believe that two of his friends were talking about something so stupid as UFOs. And he made it clear. He said, "Look, I had the highest clearance possible at Los Alamos, and if there's anything like this was really going on, I would have known about it." And so over the next few months, we started giving Bob information that he was able to check with his friends, his former associates at Los Alamos, and there was three main things, and I forget what all of them were. I know that one of them was we knew about a classified mail stop called YY-2, which was supposedly where they kept one of the aliens recovered at Roswell. And then there was another thing, we came up with the name Excalibur, and that was a bomb that they were working on in those days that was able to penetrate the soil up to 1,000 feet and blow stuff up.
A bunker buster.
Yeah, I forget what the third thing was, but Bob found out that, those things were true, and he couldn't confirm that the YY-2 was where they kept the alien, but it was certainly a classified, highly classified mail stop. So anyway, we got Bob kind of interested in, that this might be true. And he decided to call his friend, Dr. What's the guy at Lawrence Livermore, a guy who invented the H-bomb.
You're talking about,
So
Ed
he called him up.
Ed Teller.
And said that he was thinking about reentering the scientific community, and that he wondered if Teller could help him. And Teller said, Bob, do you want to work out there in Nevada or with me in California at Lawrence Livermore? Bob said, I want to work at Area 51. And Teller said, let me see what I can do. So a couple of weeks later, Bob got a call from somebody at EG&G. EG&G then were the major contractors of the test site, and he was asked to come down to an interview, and that was the EG&G facility on the south side of McCarran Field. They had a large office and a hangar there, and he went down and went through this interview, and he came over to my house right after that, and I said, how'd the interview go? He said, I aced it. And I said, cool, now what happens? He says, I don't know, they didn't say. So then a couple weeks later, they called him for a second interview, and he went in and came over that night. I said, how'd it go? And he said, well, the first question they asked me is, do you know John Lear, and what is your relationship with John Lear? And he said, I told him that I knew John Lear and that I thought he poked his nose into places where it didn't belong. And he said, what I didn't tell them is I also like to poke my nose into places where it didn't belong. And then he had a third interview, and I didn't hear anything from him until December 6th, and this would have been in 1988, when he came over, and he was always over there in the evening while I was busy at my desk working, writing checks and stuff like that. And he said, I saw a disc today. And I said, what? He said, I saw a disc today. I said, theirs or ours? He said, theirs. I said, you went to Groom Lake? He said, yeah. And I said, well, then what in the heck are you doing here? Because I said, you know that they followed you. They know that you're telling me this stuff. Why don't you work there for a couple of months, find out what's going on, and then tell me? And he said, no, John. He said, in the last 4 or 5 months, I've seen you take so much crap over this UFO stuff that I want to tell you it's real. I saw it. I touched it. And there's no doubt that it's extraterrestrial. And then I said, well, what can you tell me? He said, I've been told that I can answer any of your questions, that I just can't advance information on my own. I can answer questions, but I can't give you any information unless you ask for it. So anyway, that went on for about 2 hours, and it was really an amazing evening. I'll never forget it. And from then on, Bob went up to work there, and he'd come over every time he got back and tell me what he saw and what he did, and basically that's the Lazar story and how it went on.
Well, let me ask you, John, because this is something that at the time, as you will remember, I was the director of research for UFO magazine. This was something that I had been just wrapped up in from the get-go as soon as the word first broke. George Knapp's specials that he did, where he originally introduced a guy in blackout, electronic blackout, he called Dennis, until finally Lazar went public. Now, this was, at the time, if you weren't there today, it really will not probably resonate. But this was one of the most exciting, explosive stories to hit the airwaves since probably the assassination of Jack Kennedy. Las Vegas suddenly became a worldwide mecca with people literally coming in from all over the world because of what had been disclosed about this area called Area 51. Television programs from all over the world came in and filmed specials. Hell, I was one of the featured speakers, myself and my wife, when Nevada renamed that highway, what is it, 371, I believe, 371, John, to the ET highway?
375, I think.
375. But, this was huge beyond huge. Now, you're right. You got, because I was there, I saw it, you got a heck of a lot of crap over this from people literally all over the world. You got basically bounced from the Paranet by Speiser because initially one of the people that peripherally was involved in this story was William Cooper. Now, that is another story in its entirety. And I guess we probably should take a look at that for a little bit, if you don't mind. How did you first encounter Cooper?
He read my stuff on Paranet, and I offered, I asked him to come up and visit Las Vegas, and he came up, and we talked for a couple days. One thing I found out was he could drink more scotch than anybody ever knew, and he told me about being in the Navy and seeing the saucer when he was on a ship, and it came out of the water, did a couple of flip-flops, and then went back in the water. And he said he was the guy at Pearl Harbor that was responsible for getting out the projector and showing the classified film to the incoming Navy brass that was coming into the Pacific Theater at that time. And later, he claimed he was a much bigger deal. He said he was head of intelligence or something. He was not. He was the guy that brought out the projector and showed the stuff. And later, he told me he got a copy of everything when he left Honolulu, went back to the States, and subsequently lost everything in a fire. But anyway, we should mention that a book came out last summer called Pale Horse Rider, written by Mark Jacobson. Mark came to Las Vegas a couple of years ago and spent 4 or 5 days here in my den talking about Bill. And he wrote this book, Pale Horse Rider, that's an excellent book of absolutely the whole Bill Cooper story. And
yeah, he interviewed me. He interviewed me, and I as a matter of fact, I interviewed Mark Jacobson on this show after the book came out, and I had a chance to read it. Now, look, initially, I think Cooper, and hey, I've got my own history with Bill Cooper, as you well know. And I got to say, if there was anybody in this life that I ended up despising more than Bill Cooper, I couldn't tell you who it was. The guy was toxic. I don't think he was initially, but I think he became infected with that UFO bug where he wanted to be. And for a while, he was a genuine UFO celebrity. But I did several exposés on him. But, for example, at the Mufon Symposium in '88, which you hosted, he gave a talk that I, of course, heard, made some wild and truly outlandish claims about the moon, about Mars, and so forth. What was your initial take on that?
I just listened and took note of the fact, put it in the file, and I wasn't. I didn't know that if I believed the moon stuff very well, and even then, I still believe that the Apollo missions were true. But it turns out he was right.
About?
And, about the moon. I forget what he said, but, there's over 50 million people who live on the moon. The moon has an atmosphere, a breathable atmosphere. The gravity is 69.71% out of that of Earth's, not 1/6 as NASA complains, and that explains why both the Israeli and the India landers crashed, because they had been built with fuel to negotiate 1/6 the gravity.
50 million people on the moon, John? Where in the hell did they come from?
That's where they live. The moon was fabricated in Jupiter about, I think it's 38 million years ago. Then it was towed and placed into orbit around the Earth. And that's where these people live. They're both technologically and sociologically more advanced than we are, way more advanced than we are. And they've come down for the last 50 or 60 years and picked up various people, scientists, teachers.
Well, wait a minute. I can recall you saying on numerous occasions that you believed that the Apollo missions never once made it to the moon. They couldn't traverse the Van Allen radiation belt.
Absolutely correct.
And which just opens up a whole pot of questions in my mind. Number one, how, for example, I have a buddy, I have a friend who was the administrative assistant to the NASA director that flew the Clementine mission in the mid-90s. All right. Clementine, which was a highly secret Department of Defense satellite, went up there, totally rephotographed the moon from top to bottom, from side to side, found the 6 landing sites of the Apollo missions with the remains of the lander still on the surface. There were laser detectors that had been deposited there, and a number of other things that we used all the damn time. Now, how did they get there if we never got to the moon?
They didn't. All of that is pure bullshit. There's not a shred of truth that there is remains of the landers and the radar reflectors. You know, if you send a laser beam from the Earth to the moon, it ends up being 3 mile wide. When it reflects back, it's 6 miles wide. So this little teeny bullshit reflector that the astronauts supposedly put on is not going to reflect anything. Laser can be reflected by anything, mountains, rocks, anything on the surface of the moon. So that laser story is just pure BS.
What's your proof?
My proof of what?
Your proof that we never got there.
Well, if you go to my Facebook page, I just posted the 25 best reasons of why the Apollo missions could not have gotten there. And my computer's down now. I'd pull them up right now, but you can find it on my Facebook page. And I just might say, for the last 2.5 years, I've been posting stories on my Facebook page of all the secrets that I know. And I put details, pictures, and information where I got them from. Prometheus Studios just came up and they interviewed me for a day. They're going to make a special on their series, Unexplained, about a secret subway that goes from the Luxor Hotel, 100 feet underground, the Luxor Hotel, to the new secret test site called Sandia. It's on the Paiute Mesa, and they started to build that in 1987. And they started using it about 1992, 1993. And, of course, their main problem was, how do we get the 4,000 people that we need to run this secret base up to the test site in the morning and back in the evening without anybody knowing about it? Now, Special Projects on McCarran, on the northwest part of McCarran, has the hangar and airplanes. They have 5 Boeing 737s, a number of Beechcrafts, some King Airs, and they're responsible for taking certain personnel up to Groom Lake, Tonopah Test Range, Coyote Wells, and several other places up at the test site every day. And you can see the parking lot there, about 2,000 cars there, parked there every day. So the Special Projects, this wasn't an option for the secret test site because nobody was supposed to even know that it existed. And if they got some more 737s out of Hill Air Force Base, which is where the 5 came from, Bale airplanes, and if they got some more, then somebody would want to know where are all these people going? What's going on? So they decided, at the cost of about $2.5 billion, to build this underground maglev high-speed subway. And there's a terminal 100 feet underground under the Luxor, one under the Bellagio, and last summer they just finished one under the Aria. And they get to the transport people to the test site in about 15 or 16 minutes. And that's how they get all the people up there. Now, in those days, in the middle 90s, when they first started this, they needed 4,000 people. Now it's about 5,000 people. And they had worked out a deal with Steve Wynn to use his underground parking for the people to park in and access the underground terminals. And that's the way they keep so many cars hidden.
Now, this is all for the test site, John?
Just for Sandia, the new secret base. And I say new secret base. Heck, it's 30 years old now. And so, yeah, that's the.
So this is
original.
basically an underground bullet train.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's maglev, very high speed, and they dug it. The initial terminal was under the Luxor. The reason they put it under the Luxor is the Luxor is just across the street from Special Projects, and there was people at Special Projects, people that came in and out of Special Projects who were authorized to know about the new secret base. So they had a underground moving sidewalk that goes from Special Projects over to the underground terminal at Luxor, and that's why they used Luxor. And then they needed more room, so that's when they built the underground terminal at Bellagio. And then they needed more room, so that's when they just finished the underground terminal at Aria. Now, in 2004, and you can call this up on your computer, just type in power failure Bellagio 2004. What happened is they were enlarging the terminal under the Bellagio and somehow managed to hit the main power grid for Bellagio. And that knocked out the power for 3 days. Now, you know that when you build a casino, the first thing you're sure is you can never, ever lose power because you've got millions of dollars going across the table every hour. And there's just no way that you can lose track of that. And when this backhoe accidentally hit the power grid, it knocked out power completely. There was just not one thing except the emergency lights going. And they, and when I say they, the people who run this secret operation, were in a real bind because they had never told Nevada Power or anybody else what was going on. Now they knocked this power grid out, and they have to get it going. And so they had to go to Nevada Power, confess what they had going on, get some of their top people to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to work on this and get the power back on without anybody finding out what the real story was. And like I say, they got it on 3 days later. But if you'll notice, of all the stories on the web that you look up now, not one of them says what it was caused by. It's always a secret, or they never did find out. But it was the backhoe hitting the power grid.
Well, I got a number of questions from the audience coming from the KGRA chat lounge. This first one is really good. Let me read it to you and get your readout on it. This is from one of our chat lounge users, Libertas. He said, in the book, The Hunt for Zero Point, the author states he saw a publication a long time ago stating that Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Company, Bell Aircraft, and Lear were all working on anti-gravity, John. What are you able to tell us about their work? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, on the web, there's a 21-minute video, and it's called the Bonson Labs video, and that was it's a I think a 19 or 21-minute video of my father and Bonson and other of the highly respected UFO researchers. I'm trying to remember some of the names, working in this laboratory, and they have balsa wood shapes of UFOs, and there's a short video of my father standing at the blackboard describing he had drawn a UFO, a saucer, on the blackboard, and he's explaining something, and my mom is standing to his left, and then there's another short video of him working on something there. Now, unfortunately, the video doesn't have any sound. They put in some music, which is kind of interesting, but it has a picture of this laboratory, and I think it was taken in the Bonson Labs, and I believe that particular laboratory was in South Carolina at the time.
All right. There was a second part to his question, and this is a name, a blast from the past, Otis Carr. John, what can you tell us about Otis T. Carr? Do you think he successfully constructed a functional flying saucer?
No, he had that fake flying saucer. Everybody's seen pictures of it. They're floating around the web. And it was a good try, but it never flew.
Yeah. Well, he was trying to get funding for that, wasn't he? And from what I understand, he collected some real cash, but he was looking for investors, wasn't he?
That I don't know, but I assume he was.
Okay. All right. Now, when we were talking about the moon and whether we actually got there or not, one of the things that allegedly happened was that NASA threw a rocket booster into the moon where it purportedly caused the moon to ring like a bell for hours. Do you think that actually happened? What do you think, from your standpoint, what was that all about?
Absolutely, it did, but it had nothing to do with any Apollo missions. What it was is NASA sent those Lockheed orbiters up between 1965 and 1967 called the Lunar Orbiter Series. There was 5 of them, and they took thousands of pictures, allegedly to find the best place for the Apollo missions to land. But they got some real high-res pictures, and they would be developed and then sent back by electronic signal to Earth, and then those orbiters would crash. And it was one of those orbiters crashing that they heard the moon ringing like a bell. The moon is essentially hollow. It's not hollow like a tennis ball, but there is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles of caves and large openings where the Greys use for their laboratories.
Okay. All right. Now, this is another question from one of the users, Spring Rains. He said, if the people of Earth are incapable of travel to the moon, as you state, why would the people that allegedly live on the moon care if we knew about them?
Would they care? What are you saying? Why would they? Are you
if there in fact are lunar inhabitants, okay, on the moon, why would they give a damned one way or the other if we knew they were there?
Well, like I say, they come down, they pick up certain people at certain times, take them up there, and give them a 2-week vacation. They show them all around the different cities. They put them on a train, a maglev train, and take them all around the moon, show them all the different places, beautiful canyons that are at least 3 times the size of the Grand Canyon. They show them all around. Now, Howard Menger was one of the invitees in 1956, and he wrote a book called From Outer Space, and published by Ballantine in 1959, or copyright 1959. You can still get it at Amazon. And I just released a couple pages on my Facebook page, 2 pages, page 148 and 149, where he talks about the tour of the moon they got. And this is where I originally got the information that the lunar sky was a saffron yellow and not black, as NASA would have you believe. And Howard passed away a couple of years ago, but before he passed away, we got to be friends, or we communicated back and forth, and I sent him a color swatch with 6 different shades of saffron yellow and asked him to mark which one was the closest to the lunar sky. And he put an X on the one that was closest. And that swatch is on the livingmoon.com that Ron Schmidt and I ran for many years. Ron passed away a short time ago. And that swatch is on there where he picked the color of the lunar sky.
Has Facebook ever flagged any of your posts, John, as being untruthful?
I don't think so. You mean, I've never known of any.
Well, you know how they've been accused, especially with political postings, of censoring them. That was a question from Spring Rains. If Facebook had ever flagged any of your posts as not being true.
No, I
okay.
never heard of that.
Well, guess what? We're at the very top of the hour. Going to give you a chance to take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dark Matters Radio, brought to you by KGRA Radio, your contact point to the paranormal. We're going to be back with my very, very special guest tonight, Mr. John Lear, after the break, and I'm going to try to see if we can cut out a block of time for your phone calls. So stick around because we got more coming up. And we are back for hour number 2 with my very special guest tonight, Mr. John Lear. Now, let me set the stage. It was in November of 1988 that I had a call, spoke with John. Prior to Thanksgiving, John was invited to give an address before the Association of Retired Intelligence Officers down in Las Vegas, Nevada. John said, if you'd like to come down, he said, I'll have you come in. You can sit in and watch this. And I said, oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. So down there in Vegas, before the address that John gave, I had gone over to John's home, was in his den, and John showed me a video that I got to tell you, when I watched it, I practically lost my mind. What was that video? Well, it was the first time I had even been aware of it. It was of the president's motorcade in Dallas, Texas, President John F. Kennedy, and it was actually part of the Zapruder film, and it shows President Kennedy being struck by the bullets that ultimately killed him. Now, there's more to this. Actually, there's one hell of a backstory to this video. What was this video? Well, as I've stated, it was the Zapruder film, but this particular video was a 4th or possibly even a 5th generation video where all the Zapruder film originally was in color. All the color had been washed out of this in post-production. Now, why would that be, and who would have done it? Well, there were several people that had for years been working on the JFK assassination. One of them was a guy by the name of Lars Hansen. And Hansen, as the story goes, and I know this personally from all parties involved, had come across the fact that John Lear had been giving some UFO lectures in the vicinity of Las Vegas. He came across a flyer. Now, what was Hansen up to? Hansen had been looking for financial backing to do more research into the JFK assassination. He got in touch with John Lear and ultimately gave John a copy of this video, which was the very video that I watched in John's den. And this was also the video that John played during this lecture or this address he was giving to the former retired intelligence officers in Las Vegas. Now, John asked a very, well, at the time, I was, once again, I was blown away. He asked the audience that had they have been on duty with their various intelligence agencies during that time period, and they had been instructed by their superiors within whatever intelligence agency that was to assist in the assassination of President Kennedy, would any of them followed through with this? And as I sat in there, I caught 4 people that raised their hands that stated basically that had they have been ordered to, they would have assisted in the assassination of President Kennedy. John, do you recall that?
Like it was yesterday.
Yeah. Now, how did that whole thing come about originally? Because, look, ladies and gentlemen, this theory that, and I guess I hadn't been completely clear. The theory was that the driver of the president's limousine was actually the person that fired the fatal headshot into JFK. Now, this is where the Keller being washed out of this video and it being a 4th or 5th generation video from the Zapruder film, for just a brief instant, it looks like the driver is holding a .45 caliber pistol. And this is at the almost exact moment when President Kennedy is struck in the head by that assassin's bullet. Now, later, this video took on a life of its own. For about 3 or 4 years from that time forward, from about 88 through about 92 or so, this was all the rage, and the acrimony that stemmed from this video is truly legendary. And who was it that was carrying the torch for all this? Was Bill Cooper. John, can you fill in a little of this background?
Well, that's exactly how it went. I gave a copy to Bill Cooper, and he ran with it. I was more interested in other things, so I didn't participate on it, but Bill carried the torch.
You're not any longer, you don't think there was anything to the driver firing the fatal bullet, do you?
No, I don't think so.
Well, this was one of the things I believe that Mark Jacobson really wanted to focus on in Pale Horse Rider. Cooper, of course, to his dying day, I believe that he believed, at least publicly, that this is what happened. Do you think he was actually aware that it was crap and he was just trying to ride that to financial security?
Don't know.
Well, what about your speculation?
Yes.
John, what about your speculation? Do you speculate that he did?
Ask the question again, sorry.
Yeah. I said, what is your speculation? Do you think that Cooper knew that the driver shooting JFK theory was pure crap, but he was doing it from a purely financial position?
I don't think so.
Okay. Now, when was it that you finally became aware that Cooper was, in fact, more fraud than he was real? Was it when you were being interviewed for a television program, a strip program, and Cooper was there, and you heard him talking about the O.H. Krill documents?
Right, and Excalibur, and it was one of these weekly television programs, and it was out of Salt Lake City, and they come down, and Bill was here, so they videoed us both, and they focused on Bill, and he's telling them about O.H. Krill, that he'd read that in the Navy 10 or 20 years before, and also the Excalibur document. And I took him into my den after they finished the video, and I said, what the hell are you talking about? I said, Bob Lazar wrote that Excalibur paper 6 weeks ago, and O.H. Krill was written by me and John Grace about a year ago. He said, no, I saw them in the Navy. I said, that's absolutely impossible, Bill. And that's the beginning of the break. And things were pretty acrimonious for many years. And then later, I got a call from Bill, and I can't remember the date, maybe 98, 99, something like that. He either wrote or called. I think he wrote and said that, or maybe it was an email, and said that he apologized for the stuff that he had said, that he knew that we were both working for the same, both working to get the truth out, and he apologized. And then I never heard from him after that.
What was your reaction when you heard he was killed in that shootout with police in Ecker, Arizona, John?
That it happened just exactly as they said. It wasn't, I don't think he was assassinated or anything like that. I think it was just an accident where Bill had been drinking and he went a little bit too far.
Could you see that coming in the past? Because he would, hey, look, the guy's been gone almost 20 years, and I really don't want to take a leak on his grave, but he basically asked for that. I think he was looking for suicide by cop. I really believe that, John.
That's possible, very possible.
Okay, well, you know what? If you have no objections, I'm going to open up the phone lines. Would you be up to take some phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, look, ladies and gentlemen, this is your opportunity to speak to Mr. John Lear. If you'd like to call in with a question, a remark, a comment, whatever, for John or for myself, this is what you do. Give us a call at area code 855-472-5483. That's 855-472-5483 or 85 KGRA Live. We'll take your call, and all of this is courtesy of the Paranormal Radio app hotline. 855-472-5483. John, what have you been up to in the last several years? I know that physically you're not bouncing around like you used to. Do you have any projects that you've been working on?
No, most of my time I spend on researching the moon and getting the best pictures I can. The pictures that are available to the public, the best ones are the Lunar Orbiter series, and a lot of them have been airbrushed. But when that happened, when they took those pictures, the NASA had no idea or didn't realize how much could be resolved from those pictures, and they didn't spend as much time airbrushing as they should have. And there's some pictures that show some fantastic things in there. For instance, the Damso pictures, the city of Damso, which is in the as we look at the moon in the southwest part of it, a huge city. I think it has about 2.5 million people there, and it's just as clear as a bell. I mean, there's streets and lights and everything that that show up very clearly. The other picture is Aristarchus. Aristarchus is that very bright light that shows up just to the northwest of Copernicus, which NASA's always told us some bright sand. But Ron Schmidt and I hired a astrophotographer in the UK to take a picture, and he took his 10-inch scope and took 192 pictures, put them all together, and gave us a really, really good picture of the moon, not only in the full color that it has, but shows Aristarchus is actually what we think is a nuclear reactor, 23 kilometers in diameter, and you can see its 6 supporting beams and the blue color coming from it. And the blue color is when nuclear material reacts with air, it turns blue. And it's really a really good picture. That's on my Facebook page too. And then Petavius B, which is another city that's on the right side of the moon. Petavius and Petavius B, beautiful, large cities, very well lit. There's another picture on Mare Crisium on the northwest shoreline. There's an antenna that's about 5 miles high, and it's shaped exactly like a champagne glass. I mean, it's just as clear as a bell. You just couldn't mistake it for anything else. And of course, it's not a champagne glass, but it is an antenna shaped like one. And then there's all other kinds of photos, and I just like to go over the lunar orbiter pictures that are available and look for stuff like that.
Well, from the time you first began in the UFO field, which is roughly about the same time that I became involved, for years and years and years, the military, the government, the intelligence services, NASA, have denied that there's anything to the entire UFO subject until December of 2017, when former Senator Harry Reid held a presser where he basically came forward and admitted having helped secure over $22 million for a Pentagon, a secret Pentagon research effort into UAPs as a threat potential. They admitted it. Reid admitted it. And today we know that the U.S. Navy has even basically told their pilots that if they see anything, if they encounter anything, whatever, they are to be debriefed about that. Now, it seems like a complete 180-degree turnaround, John, into this whole UFO thing. What is your attitude about that?
My attitude is Harry Reid spent 30 years in the Senate, and he always got a free lunch. And when he retired from the Senate, he didn't have a free lunch anymore, so he had to figure out a way to get it. So one of the ways he figured out is that the Pentagon, he knew, had tons of secret information, thousands of feet of clear video of saucers, at least 66 saucers, many different types of aliens on ice, all kinds of information. He knew they wanted to keep it a secret, but he said, look, Lee and Bigelow will be Mr. and Mrs. Disclosure. You give us $22 million, and we'll take the heat off you for all that stuff you got. And they said, great, because for $22 million, they were going to be rid of people hounding them for the information they got. And then Reed and Bigelow would just, use some of this nonsense, like those carrier photos, the tic-tac, the flopping tic-tac and stuff, and show the public. And the public would think, well, maybe we're making headway. Maybe we're going to get something. And Harry would get his free lunch because with the $22 million, they'd be able to get it out of that.
Now, how involved, in your opinion, John, is Bigelow? Okay, because everybody knows that Robert Bigelow has always had basically a huge thing for the UFO and ET topic. What do you think that's all about when it comes to Bigelow?
He did have a huge interest in UFOs. He was one of the first ones to get hold of Bob, and they formed a company called Zeta Reticuli 2, and they were going to research a lot of the stuff that Bob had found out. They bought they rented a space just east of McCarran Airport, where they set up a laboratory, and Bigelow bought all kinds of equipment that Bob could use to build his stuff, and it went on for a couple months. And Bigelow's idea of this was that he could take his friends down to this laboratory and say, here's my friend Bob Lazar. He's making all this secret stuff that he found out at the test site, and he works for me. Whereas Bob's idea was he was going to take as much as the lab equipment over to his house and work on stuff that he wanted at his leisure. And, of course, a year later it broke up. They dissolved the corporation, and they didn't have anything to do with each other. Now, along comes the military, and Bigelow, like many people, are very impressed with a military guy coming in, his chest full of medals, and says, we need some help, Bob, and we think you're the guy to help us. We need some areas to keep astronauts in orbit, and you know a lot about hotels, and so you can help us there, and we can give you some pretty big contracts, and you'd be a real asset to us. And so Bigelow says, okay, yeah, sure. And they said, but one thing. He says, what? He says, no more UFO stuff. It's not true. We don't have anything to do with it, and we don't want to hear anything about it. So Bigelow went along with it anyway, and went into the hotel thing, and he thought all the time that the more he was involved with NASA, the more information he would get. And he found out he didn't get anything, nothing. And he was very disappointed that all the time he spent with them, he didn't find out a single thing. So as you know, he sold his whole business, and now he's working with Reed, supposedly. And that's the end of that story.
Do you think anybody in Congress knows any more about it than you and I do, John?
No, they are specifically, if they just said the least thing about UFOs, they're taken into a room and briefed and said, okay, here's the deal. Nothing. There's nothing that we're going to give you or that we have, and so we want you to shut up. or else. And that's what happens to everybody. You know, the presidents go there. Clinton tried to do the same thing. Tried to find out.
Well, I understand so did Obama.
Yeah. But they don't understand that the people who run this country particularly dislike anybody that is elected or appointed. They have their own group. And clearances work like this: top secret and the Q clearance. Q clearance is a civilian level of top secret, are the lowest clearances you can get. Above that, there's 38 levels. The first 28 are top secret crypto, and they're numbered 1 through 28. Then above 28, there's 10 names, and they go like Umbra, Ultra, different names all the way to the top one, which is Majestic. And the President of the United States, he doesn't have a very high clearance. He has like top secret crypto 17. But when you have a crypto level and you are read into that program, that doesn't mean you get to know everything that's in that level.
Right. You've got to have a need to know.
Right. So nobody gets to know very much.
Let's take a phone call. We've got Ron calling us from Minnesota. Ron, good evening. Do you have a question for John?
Hi, Don. Always a fun show, and hello to Mark and whoever else is here, and thank you for taking the call. And John, welcome, and glad that you're the guest. Interesting subject. I watched the moon landing when I was in school. You know, we sat in the classroom, you know, with the black and white TV, you know what I'm talking about? And when it happened in 69, right? And so we watched that, and I believed it happened. I didn't have a question in my mind that it was real. Okay? Now,
so did I.
I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that if we never had the successful moon mission from the Apollo mission, then why in the hell would we have millions of people in cities up there at this point if we never actually landed on the moon in the first place? And so what's the whole theory behind creating a city up there? Now, granted, I believe that we've been going there all this time from our last mission, even though they told us, we haven't been back yet. But yet, I believe we've been making a regular trip there all the time. So I think your idea of the city could very well possibly be. However, I find it very hard to wrap my head around that idea. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, well, those people have nothing to do with us. They're not from Earth. They're from someplace else.
Okay.
And they have absolutely nothing to do with us. Now, NASA tells us there's 9 planets in our solar system. Actually, there's 40 planets. And they all have civilizations. They all have civilizations of humans or different types of ET. They all communicate. They all trade. There's all kinds of trade agreements going on. There's all kinds of traffic between those planets in our solar system. But we're the morons of the solar system. We're here for a specific purpose, which has nothing to do with any of the others in the solar system. And they don't have anything to do with us. The only thing they have to do with us is occasionally they'll send out tour ships to fly around Earth and look at the idiots that have their wars and stuff like that. And that's the only thing they have to do.
I gotta ask, John. For God's sake, I gotta ask. All right, where did this information come from? What exactly would prove that you've seen the proof to make a statement like that of 40 planets in the solar system with inhabitants? That's some wild stuff, man.
Where are the other planets?
You're not going to find it. You're not going to find it on the web, and you're not going to find it in Encyclopedia Britannica.
Well, granted, but where in the hell did you find it?
I found it.
Yeah, you found it where?
Interesting.
Okay, you can't make a statement like that and not back it up.
Sure, I can.
Well, you did, sure, but it sounds well. Dare I say it? Okay, I gotta say it. It sounds like horse shit, John.
Hey, take it or leave it.
I like it.
Okay.
I like it.
All right.
John.
Thanks for making me laugh.
All right, thank you, John.
Okay.
Great show, John, and thank you, Don, for taking the call, and thank you for the open lines once again. And we'll talk to you next time.
Okay,
right.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, the phone lines are open. My very special guest, John Lear, give us a call at 855-472-5483. If you have a question for John, a comment, a remark, something for me, give us a buzz. We are open. John, going back to the JFK assassination thing, how many years has it been since you've heard from Lars Hansen?
Been a long time. At least 20 years?
Oh, I would say at least that, yeah. Do you think he was actually onto something with his research, trying to prove that the driver, in fact, fired the fatal headshot?
No, I think he got into a beef with a very famous actor and got in over his head, and I think he was eliminated. But that's just a personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of people that had a lot of different theories about that, not the least which were the Cuban community down in Florida, the freedom fighters that had attempted to invade Castro's Cuba in '62, which led to the missile crisis. That was a very scary time.
Yeah.
I remember because I was in school then, and my old man, my father, was in the reserves at that point, and they were all expecting to be called up to be sent down there. Now, let me come forward a little bit. Just the other day, the President of the United States, POTUS, declared a national emergency with this coronavirus situation that is currently apparently grasping the entire world. What's your take on this?
That would take a long time. It's a long story.
Give me the Cliff Notes.
The Cliff Notes. Essentially, the government made COVID-19, and it's supposed to eliminate a lot of people from the planet. That's why, beginning in the 60s, they started building these massive underground cities and freeways, and that's where they're going to go to protect themselves. Now, whether any of that is true, I don't know, but that's my take on it.
Well, up to this point, it would appear that only the elderly, especially with respiratory compromised systems, appear to be in the crosshairs. I mean, at this point, it doesn't appear that a lot of much younger people have been that adversely affected, at least lethally. And the other thing is, by all accounts at this point, now, of course, you never know. Quite frankly, John, I don't believe a damn thing I hear, see, or read until it's been basically driven into my head with a spike. But at this point, it appears that this came out of China, out of Wuhan. There's a bioweapons or a biological lab there. There's been a lot of crap about that, but it appears to be of Chinese origin. You don't think that that's the case?
No, I think it came out of the Meditos thing.
Okay, and if it did, what is your speculation on why?
Well, I just told you, like the HIV was developed by the U.S. Navy. The surgeon who developed it was a guy named R.M. Donner. Bob Lazar and I tried to find him because we found out he was retired and lived in Santa Fe. And Bob and I drove to Los Alamos several times on projects he had, and we'd always stop in Santa Fe at the address that we had and see if we could meet up with R.M. Donner and ask him a few questions about the HIV, but we never got him at home, or he was always away or never answered the door or whatever. COVID-19 is the same thing as the HIV. It has a protein covering that is, you can't get through it without a special type of plant. For instance, HIV, Trichosanthus curalawi, you needed to make the cure, and it's that plant or one similar to it that has the protein covering of the virus that prevents the T4 cells from doing their job. So, like I say, maybe it's for a bunch of people, maybe it's not, but that's what it looks like to me.
Well, by all accounts, it's tremendously contagious.
Which naturally it was supposed to be, right?
Right. And the other thing that struck me as extremely odd is this long time that it would seemingly lay in your system with no symptoms whatsoever, all the while you are shedding the virus.
Right.
Now that would seem to me to be the type of thing that a biowarfare laboratory would want, to have many infected before the virus does its thing with them, right?
Right.
Yeah, some very, very strange things. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the phone lines are open. We've got roughly 15, 20 minutes yet. 85 KGRA Live is the number. My guest, Mr. John Lear. John, you recently moved, haven't you? Are you still in Vegas?
Yeah, I've been here for 34 years. Actually, I've been in this house for 34 years. I've been in Vegas longer. But I sold the house. It's too big for me now, and I'm moving to, haven't found a place yet, but I'm just looking for a small 2 or 3 bedroom house where I can move all my junk into, and that should be within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Cool. That's cool. It's the weather over there has always been problematical for me. I mean, my God, in the summertime it's like an oven, and in the wintertime it gets pretty coolish, but that's still a happening city. How has this epidemic affected the tourist travel over there?
It's amazing. It's cut off a lot. I just had the paper in front of me this morning that says everything is being affected, and it's going to be a major problem here.
And it won't take real long, will it?
That I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm speculating it wouldn't take too long. Tell me, in all the years that you were involved in the overall UFO thing, did you ever regret stepping into that mess?
Sometimes I did, but the end, no, because I found out such fascinating things going on in the universe that wouldn't have been available to me, that I wouldn't have found out if I didn't get involved in this.
Well, for example, with the Bentwaters case. Now, the Bentwaters case was something that was, Chuck DeCaro, for example. I interviewed Chuck DeCaro, who was the guy that originally broke that, originally on CNN back in, 83 or 84. And the person that came forward and spoke to DeCaro was a guy by the name of Larry Warren. Now, since then, it appears that much of Larry Warren's story has fallen apart as far as his involvement in it. What do you have any thoughts on that? And what is it in your mind, John, that caused people to become fantasists or many people to become fantasists when they get involved in this?
I believe I've been a friend of Larry Warren's for many, many years. I believe every word he says. Those are trying to say that he is not, that nothing like that. They don't know what happened, and I don't know why that's going on. I know the government is very trying to put an end to major UFO stories, and they probably picked on Larry, but it's not true what they're saying about him.
Okay, hang on. We got Kim from Alberta, Canada, calling in. Kim, good evening. Do you have a question for John?
John, it's so glad to hear your voice on the radio. And Don, nice to talk to you again this evening.
Thank
Let's
you.
Maybe see if I can get a question out for your guest, though. John, you bring so many memories to me of a young lad sitting in our northern lakes here, and my friend would throw on a Emerson, Lake and Palmer 8-track, and we'd sit there and listen to it, and he'd tell me a story about this gentleman that invented the 8-track and the Lear jet and all this other great stuff. And later in my life, I met a gentleman out of Yuma, Arizona that knew you, that told me these fantastic stories again, and I've always just kind of been bewildered. And are these stories true? Is that your father, the Lear jet man, the 8-track man, the other things he invented?
That's my father, and he moved the Learjet Corporation from Switzerland to Wichita in 1963. And about that time, Mad Months had put out the 4-track tapes, and my dad felt that he could very easily make it 8-track, which he did, and perfected it, and then sold it to, or got Ford to put it out on their some of their cars in 1965, and that was a huge operation there.
That is truly amazing. I know your dad. What was it like with your father? Like, he was like an inventor of all sorts of things.
Yeah, he did come up with a lot of things.
Now, back in the 70s, we had this story, and I don't know where this came from, and we didn't have internet. We were just young guys that talked about a lot of crazy stuff back in the day, and saw some crazy stuff, actually. But one of them was that your dad had contact with aliens and had some kind of connection or something, and that was maybe just because, I mean, the jet itself was keeping up with fighter jets at the time, and it was like off the scale for when it came out. Is that not true?
I don't think it's true. I never heard anything like that. My dad was heavily involved in UFO research, and he had a contract, actually Lear Incorporated. It was called Lear Incorporated until he sold his stock in 1961. It became Lear Siegler. But when he was running it, he was a major contractor for many different things for the Air Force. And in 51, 52, they gave him a contract for anti-gravity, and his company worked on it. And in 1953, he was on a sales trip to Bolivia, and he was met at the airport where a bunch of reporters, and they just wanted to know about UFOs and what he knew about UFOs, and he told them, and he said that he thought they, came from space, and gave him a lot of information. Well, this didn't set too well with the Pentagon because of the contract he had for anti-gravity, so they actually took his clearance away. But Lear Incorporated still worked on the anti-gravity, which I think at least the anti-gravity that they had was perfected in 1956, and we've had saucers ever since then. There's many different types of anti-gravity, so that was one of the early ones. But
that doesn't surprise me.
He never got his clearance back, and when they took away his clearance, they probably told him something like, if we ever hear another word about UFOs out of you, we're not only going to kill you, we're going to kill Moya, we're going to kill your kids, we're going to kill your grandparents, your mother, your father, your parakeet, your dog, and everyone else. So just shut up.
Yes.
And he never said much. He never commented on UFOs.
Well, I think that held the dam back for so many years, this kind of subterfuge on people from who knows what source. But, I mean, even in our own country, we had our own kinds of way of, belittling people that did see them, making light of them, making jokes, and the whole rest of it that went along with it. But I think you just keep up. I mean, it's good that people look at the moon, John. I think for whatever reason, look up, check it out, because it is an odd piece of material that's sitting in our space that defies a lot of descriptions of what should be a moon. I mean, it's way too big for the size of our Earth, that's for sure. And I think Mark Antonio mentions it quite a bit there, Don, on his show. And it's a very interesting subject. And I'll get off now because I know you're running out of time. And thank you, Don. Awesome show. Thank you, John. Awesome.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Have a great weekend. And we still have roughly 6 or 7 minutes. If you'd like to call in and speak to my guest, Mr. John Lear, 855-472-5483 or 85 KGRA Live. John, right now, there is a television series that was on the History Channel, put out by the To the Stars Academy, fronted by Tom DeLonge, a number of high-profile people from Lockheed, from the federal government, from the Central Intelligence Agency's scientific aspect. What do you think that was all about? Did you watch that when it was on?
What was the name of it?
To the Stars Academy, Tom DeLonge. This is where the entire Nimitz battle group, Tic Tac video, and everything else was originally disclosed about a year ago.
Yeah. Well, that's, like I said, that's just to get the heat out of the Pentagon, to give the public just a little bit of information and see if that'll satisfy them.
Okay, speaking about your father and others' research into anti-gravity, I know from having researched, among other people, Donald Kehoe, going all the way back to the 50s when they brought over the Nazi rocket scientists, including Hermann Oberth, that they were working on anti-gravity then. Do you think they ever got a working prototype going?
They NASA, they the Germans, they the Nazis, which one?
Well, here in the United States after the end of the war. At that point, Hermann Oberth was over here under contract to the Pentagon. They were working on anti-gravity. This is about the same time that your father would have been involved. Do you think they ever got a working example of anti-gravity in the pipeline?
I think so, by 1956. Now, whether it was Lear Incorporated that made it or whether they were helped by the Germans, I don't know. But 1956 is when they had their own saucers.
What about right now? Do you think that, in fact, there is a secret space program with advanced technology flying around up there of ours?
You know, we have a lot of stuff in low Earth orbit, but because of the Van Allen belt, we can't get any farther than that. So we have all kinds of stuff in low Earth orbit. We have the direct energy weapons, which leveled the World Trade Center 1 and 2, and possibly 7. And those things can really cause some damage. The first time they tried it out was on the Mira building in Oklahoma City, and they only used it at half power. When they used it on World Trade Center 1 and 2, it really disintegrated both those buildings into about 1 or 2 layers of steel and concrete, and all the rest of the 960,000 tons was turned into dust 80 microns in diameter, and that's what was floating around the streets of Manhattan. You see the pictures of the black dust. That's what the direct energy weapon reduced everything to.
Well, that direct energy weapon, for example, knocked out the McMurray building down there. Then poor Timothy McVeigh was executed for no reason.
Yeah, I don't think he was executed, but he had nothing to do with it.
So you don't think that he put together a super bomb, a fuel, and you know, what the hell do you call it?
Absolutely impossible.
Why?
Well, the way that the building came down, and the fact that when they went in after the explosion and they found explosives taped to the columns, there was just no way he could have caused that kind. They could have caused that kind of damage. That was strictly direct energy weapon.
Well, okay.
Hey, John, I have a question for you. If you care about this type of thing, what would you like to be remembered for amongst the work you've done?
You know, you haven't asked me what people are here on Earth for, but I'll tell you. We've all lived hundreds of lives before. Don has, I have, everybody has. And we're on Earth put here for a refresher course on living our lives with integrity, without envy, without hate, and without greed. Somewhere in the past hundreds of lives that we've lived, we've kind of lost touch with what it's all about. So we're on Earth to refresh our memory in living with integrity, without envy, without hate, without greed, and expressing our love to our families. And when we pass away, we go into this huge lobby. You remember when Steve Jobs passed away, his family was around his bed, and he goes, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. He was seeing that lobby. And you're met by whoever you believe in. If you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus, if you believe in Allah. And that person, whoever you believe in, takes you to meet some of the people that you've been friends with over your lifetime, many lifetimes previous to that. Then after that, you're taken into a small room, which is life review. And you get to see your life, the entire, from beginning to end, in full Technicolor, Dolby sound, absolutely clear, all the good and wonderful things you did and how healthy you've been. And then it shows you every single nasty thing you ever did. And at the end of that, I don't know who makes the decision, but the decision is made whether you have to come back to Earth and live another life and make another effort at living with integrity, without envy, without hate, without greed, or you get to stay where you're at, which is the fourth dimension, which we call heaven. But if you have a idea of heaven, just exponentially multiply that by 1,000, and that's how much greater it is. And from there, you can work your way up into the many different dimensions that are available, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. And people ask, well, how many dimensions are there? And the answer is, it's infinite. So all this stuff we hear about Neil deGrasse Tyson and all his BS about the Big Bang and 19 billion years is all nonsense. The universe has been here forever, and it will be here forever. It's not expanding. It's not contracting. It's just there.
All right. Thank you.
Well, that's a that's a hell of a way to look at it. I had in my past an incident, John, that happened. We're almost out of time, but in December of 1971, I was in Vietnam, and I had a family member in what ultimately proved to be a life-ending situation. But through my mother, I was brought back to the States via the Red Cross, where I was able to basically spend a little time with my grandfather. It was actually my mother's father, whom I was very, very close to. And I got to see him before he passed on. He did pass on. And I was terribly affected. And the day of the funeral, back on the East Coast, the way funerals are usually done, you have all the people, all the mourners come over to the home, bring foodstuffs and what have you. And I had gone into one of the bedrooms and had laid down when I was visited by my grandfather. And that's something that I've never, ever forgotten. So when you say there's life beyond this physical body, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind. John, we are out of time. This has truly been a distinct pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. And, best wishes at you, my friend. Like I said, we've known each other a very long time, and I wish you the very best. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for tonight. We will be back again next week. In the meantime, keep your eyes pointed up, your ear to the ground, just to get an idea of what's happening, and we'll see you then. Good night.
Amazon Business honors Ricardo Gurgel, owner of Veggie Root Tavern. This week, Ricardo saved big and used Amazon Business to help his team buy commercial deep fryers at a quantity discount. Because even veggies can be fried.
I'm gonna need 2 orders of fried fiddleheads.
With business buying easier than before, Ricardo now uses his extra time to focus on growing something big. Buy smarter, dream bigger. Visit Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. Fiddleheads. Yum.